Welcome, everyone. I'm glad that you found my other podcast, The Neurodiverse Teacher's Superpowered Voices. This is a podcast I'm really excited about because we're really going to take a deeper dive into looking at young adults and youth mental health needs in education setting and just the world itself. So I'm really excited to have my first guest with us this evening. My guest is Stephen Luong. Stephen is a University of Saskatchewan. I knew I'd mess it up. University of Saskatchewan College of Kinesiology student, a peer volunteer, and he is the creator of our 1 in 3 Autoethnography podcast. I say that word right, but then I messed up the name of the college, which I thought was going to be the other way. But anyways, more importantly, welcome, Stephen. I'm really excited to have you here and for us to have a conversation today about you, about mental health, about what young adults need right now to feel more connected to each other and secure and confident in their mental health needs. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction. I'm excited to be here. I'm just happy that you pronounced the podcast right.
I knew I was going to mess up one of them, but that was not the one part that I thought I was going to mess up on. But that's all right. We're going to keep moving. So I'm going to jump in. I'm going to ask us a question, and then you and I can kind of talk about it, and we'll take it from there. But my biggest question that I wanted to ask you about, and hopefully will be meaningful to our listeners, is what was school like for you when you were younger, and what were some of the more challenging hurdles that you faced when you were in school? So I'm talking like high school age, maybe even middle school.
Yeah, okay. So I guess for context, I wasn't diagnosed with my mental illnesses until after high school and elementary school, or middle school, you said. So it was a big struggle because a lot of the issues that I had, I believed were my own fault, right? I've been diagnosed with ADHD, bipolar type 2, and generalized anxiety disorder. So in middle school and elementary, pretty much all through that whole period, I felt really isolated, right? There's that feeling that no one really understands you, or no one really understands what's going on. And I'm sure that you might have encountered that, Kristen. Because, I remember a lot of what came out of the parent-teacher interviews or meetings were Stephen's, he never focuses and he's always too fidgety. And, that got me into a lot of trouble. But the big ones, I guess, were the social issues, right? Because when you're a kid or a teenager, it's kind of hard to understand that, thinking about it, like, what is mental health, or even recognizing a mental illness in yourself or something like that. It's challenging to navigate when you're around people who are, I guess, neurotypical, right?
No, I understand that. It's incredibly isolating, especially when you don't know what's happening to you. You feel like it's in your head, right? You feel like it's just me. And if people know that this is what I'm thinking or experiencing or going through, like, they're going to think I'm so weird. So I've got to do all these different things to try to essentially mask it so people don't realize that this is what's going on inside my head.
Mm-hmm. Like, there was always that feeling in my case, like I just felt out of place in middle school or high school. Like, the big challenge was kind of accepting myself and seeing myself for who I am, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, exactly. And how did you start to do that? How did you realize that I need to start accepting myself? Because I feel like that's part of the hardest thing when you do feel alone or you do feel isolated. What was that like moment where you're like, I've got to just start accepting me?
That wasn't until after high school. My first year of university was really rough. I got away from my home, so I was drinking quite a lot, like way too much. And my first year of university was just awful. And I got to the point where I wanted to die, and I was feeling miserable every day. And, one of my best friends, the one who I started the other podcast with, we always talked about our lives, and looking back on it, I was like, I'm in this terrible spot. I don't like who I am. And my two choices right now are either to die or keep living. And that was kind of a wake up call to me, because I was like, well, what is it that I'm going through right now? And how can I make it better? So it wasn't like a one time thing. It's still something that I struggle with, like this whole, I guess, process of getting better. But those problems did appear as pretty early, right?
So do you feel like the things that you still struggle with are things that you're still working every day to kind of talk yourself through, just, to find maybe the brighter side of things versus the things that can feel like they're pulling you under sometimes?
In a way, yeah. A lot of it has been hard work through counseling and therapy, and getting the right medication, speaking to the right people, and doing a lot of that. I can't say that it's well, I can say that it's gotten easier, but I can't say that it's not hard sometimes. Do you understand that?
No, that makes perfect sense to me as someone who has been diagnosed with ADHD, with general anxiety, with depression, with PTSD. It's crazy. I have moments, right, where I feel like I could take on the world. Like everything is like at my fingertips. I've got this. I've got the energy. I've got the motivation. I feel like I can do it. And then for like no seemingly reason, like it doesn't mean something had to happen in my day, all of a sudden it's like this feeling creeps in, right? Like this overwhelming feeling of you don't got this, or this is really hard, or what were you thinking that you could achieve that. And again, it doesn't mean that something happened. It doesn't mean that like, oh, I had a bad day, or I didn't, something disappointing happened. Like sometimes you're just like watching TV and it's like, hello, old friend, I'm here to just mess with your mind, right? And it's so crazy because it does create this up and down. But I think, like you said, you have to almost create this, it's like a practice, so that when those voices or those thoughts do creep in, right, you go, I know it's just a moment. This is just a passing moment. This is just this minute. I'm feeling that way because maybe I'm triggered or overwhelmed right now, but like this is not forever. I've got to find a way back to those feelings of I got this. And I feel like that's something that comes with practice and time. But when you're first starting to experience that thought or those feelings, you don't necessarily know how to respond to it. So it's really easy to get sucked into that feeling.
Oh, absolutely. And especially like recognizing that you're not the one causing them. That's something that I struggled with quite a bit, blaming myself for feeling suicidal, or blaming myself for being anxious. Like when you can understand that if you're diagnosed with a mental illness, if you can understand that that's something separate, right? Like you wouldn't blame a diabetic for having high blood sugar or whatever, right? So it's a symptom, right? It shows up, and it's challenging when it's there, but being able to kind of look at yourself and delve into that a little bit more, I think that was the most helpful thing for me.
That's good. And do you feel like when you left high school and you went to college, do you feel like you were able to find other peers who maybe had similar experiences to you, and did that help at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I said, my best friend who I started the podcast with, we shared a lot of similar experiences. There's a lot that I really don't want to get into, but
I'll never push.
yeah, I'll throw the word abuse out there, and you can do what you want with that. So really having someone there that you can be open with, right? That you can kind of share those feelings. And he was the first person that I did that with. And let me tell you, Kristen, that was like the scariest thing I've ever done,
I'm sure that there has to be this high level vulnerability because you don't know how the person's going to respond.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's often why a lot of people are afraid to talk about mental health, is because the level of vulnerability that you have to be at in order to talk about it, and then not knowing how people will respond. I have had people who I have worked with who knew when I was going through kind of what I call my mental breakdown. They knew that they would say things to me like, don't tell anybody. don't say anything to anybody because you don't want people to look at you the wrong way. And those are just the types of messages that kind of reinforce that, like, having mental health needs or having this need to take care of yourself is a negative thing, that people will look at you in a negative light by saying, hey, I need help, or I need a break, or I'm burnt out, or I'm like, I finally hit my wall. But it's really scary that people don't seem to be more accepting of it. So sorry, I'm like going off on this tangent, but I think it's really powerful what you said, because there is this level of vulnerability that comes along with being, do I trust this person enough to open up and share some of my deepest fears and my deepest secrets?
Yeah. And, you mentioned, I can't quite remember what you were saying, but I have words to say now. You talked about mental health as taking care of yourself, right? And for some reason, the perception of that is negative.
Yeah.
When I think of mental health, I think of it like it's an aspect of your health, right? Like there's physical health, there's mental health, and other components. But it's not like, it's weird that people are embarrassed to speak about it or to try and get better,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really know how to approach that. Like, what do you think about that?
I think it's stuff like this right now, talking about it, to me, is the biggest way to approach it. It's still scary, even when you have started to talk about it. I still think that there's that level of vulnerability, because that not everybody will be accepting, or maybe it'll change people's perception of you. But I think with age, at least in my case, you start to care less and less about what people think about you. I still have moments of sensitivity, so I don't want to be like, oh, I don't care at all. But like, I still have moments, right? But it's definitely significantly less than when I was 23 or something like that. But I think the only way to really start to break stigma is to have more people talk about it, to have more people say, this is my diagnosis, or this is my story, or this is what I've gone through. I think a lot about Simone Biles during the Olympics, and when she didn't compete and she kind of stood her ground, and there was a recent tennis player who did the same thing. And I think the more people do things like that, and the more people talk about what's going on, that's the way to break down these walls. Because I think a lot of times people are afraid that nobody else has ever felt this way. That's still that lonely isolation piece that we talked about. And I think people think I'm the only one who's experiencing this, or I'm the only one who's felt this way, because we don't talk about it. And that just continues to make people feel alone, when actually there's a lot of people out there. And I think there's a lot of people out there who have experienced these feelings, but are still too afraid to say that they've experienced it, or speak up and say, yeah, I know what that's like, because they're still afraid. But maybe at best, they won't be the people who are judgy or judgmental or negative. And hopefully one day it'll give them the confidence to speak up and speak out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not sure if you do this, but in the theme of having more people speak about it, I kind of want to flip the question on you and ask the exact same thing, pretty much. Like, what was school for like when you were younger, and what were some of the challenges that you faced?
Oh, absolutely. I love it. Flip the questions on me anytime. School is funny. I had friends when I was in school, but I was never a popular person by any means. I think I always wanted to be, but I wasn't. I definitely dealt with bullying on a pretty significant basis. I was ADHD, and I think I had some of those social aspects that come along with ADHD, very talkative or whatever. So I'm sure I didn't always rub people the right way, but I felt alone a lot in school. I was not a great student at all. I definitely did better in areas of interest, like most people with ADHD do, but math was not my jam. And I was definitely one of those kids who got a lot of negative messages on a day-to-day basis. I can remember my 6th grade social studies teacher hauling me out into the hallway because I had been like picking my thumb during class, which to this day is like, if you leave me alone without a phone or something, like I'm immediately like picking at my fingers. And she just reamed me out like how disrespectful I was and how I wasn't paying attention. And I used to get that a lot too. If I was either doodling or doing something else, I would get a whole bunch of like I wasn't paying attention to class. So you start to really feel bad about who you are as a learner. I can remember taking time tests and all my peers are done and I'm like having an anxiety attack internally, not knowing that it was anxiety, because why is everyone else done and I'm not done? Oh, well, then I must be stupid type of thing, because, you know, my processing just worked different. So I really didn't like school, to be honest. I really hated high school in the sense that I just felt so alone, and just felt misunderstood. And like I couldn't tell anybody. You know, like I couldn't tell anybody that these were the feelings. I was still that generation that if you went to your parents, you were told you were fine. I was still very much so that generation. And mental health wasn't like something that was talked about at all, nor do I think, had I talked to my peers about it, that it would have been like a concept like it is now. I think they would have also not been sure what to say to me either. So it was really lonely, and it definitely got better though in college. In college, I like got this sense to like almost reinvent myself, but I also got to start studying things that were purely of interest of mine. And I started to do so much better. And that's when my light bulb finally started to go off. Like, maybe I'm actually a little bit smarter than I thought I was, or I ever gave myself credit for. So I understand that feeling of being kind of feeling alone and isolated. And really, I felt like I was always just trying to work so hard to cover it up so that nobody would recognize or realize that I felt this way or was experiencing those things.
Yeah. How did you navigate those feelings of loneliness and isolation?
I spent a lot of time in my room listening to music and writing in a journal. I mean, I know that sounds so sad and like email, but that is what I did. If I wasn't with friends, I really spent, my brothers were so much older than me. They were 15 and 12 years older than me. And so it was like being an only child. And so I spent a lot of time in my room listening to music, like internet, social media, none of that stuff really existed. So I had like whatever was on TV, not a selection of things, whatever was on TV or music. So I spent a lot of time laying in bed listening to music. Radiohead became one of my big go-tos.
Yeah.
For when
Your
I was
emo
feeling
phase.
melancholy. That's my guilty melancholy pleasure there. But
Yeah.
I think we all just create our own coping strategies, I guess.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I'm glad now, like when I get to talk to young adults or when I was a classroom teacher and I taught high school, I loved sharing some of what I went through with students, especially if it was students who were still in that phase of feeling like nobody understands what I'm going through or nobody has felt what I'm going through. I've always admitted like, yeah, I've got ADHD or I've dealt with anxiety because I wanted students to know that they're not alone. But
Yeah.
all right, so let me flip this on you. What kind of mental health supports do you wish existed either when you were younger or now? And I ask that question because the more work I do with family and youth, the more I realize there is almost no really amazing supports out there. Like it's very minimal what exists out there to address mental health needs.
Yeah. Sorry.
You're good.
I feel like there is quite a lot of support out there, which kind of contradicts what you just said. But
maybe in Canada, maybe it's the Canadian versus the US type of thing.
oh yeah, maybe. I didn't even think about that because I think the problem is just accessibility and, being able to navigate those when you're a child or a teenager. That's probably a little bit difficult, like
Yeah.
we have kids help phone or counselors or the crisis suicide prevention hotline in Saskatchewan. Like they're out there, right? But there's still that barrier and being like, when I was younger, I didn't want to be the type of person to be using those supports, right? And, most schools have a guidance counselor, I believe, or someone who you can speak to when some of these feelings come up. But I never wanted to do that. So,
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
I wish there was just more support out there in so many different levels. Like my brain goes all over the place. I'm asking a very broad question, but I feel like there's so many different avenues you could go down. Like I feel like there needs to be better hospitalization programs. I feel like most of students who I've ever worked with who've ever had any type of hospitalization experience never have given me any kind of feedback that's made me feel like that was the best thing that's ever happened. Like I'm so glad I was hospitalized. Like it helped me so much, and I have never once heard that from anybody. And I've worked with a lot of youth who've been hospitalized. So I feel like not just residential hospitalizations, but like in-person or day treatments, outpatient options. Like I've never had youth come back and say to me, like, this has been a great experience. And the same thing with some of the other residential or wilderness programs. And I'm not saying that there aren't some great ones out there, but I feel like I hear more negative experiences from students than I hear positive experiences. And I get that most of the time, if you're having to participate in any type of program like that, you're probably not in the best space that you've been in your life. But I would hope that at the end of the experience, you could go, wow, I'm so glad I had that opportunity. I'm so glad I went there. This was so helpful. This is all the stuff I experienced. But I don't know that I've ever heard kids say that to me or young adults say that to me. So I would really love to see programming that makes young adults feel like this was good. This is what I needed. This is what made me feel not alone or made me feel more connected or made me understand what was happening to me. I also would love to see more preventative measures, especially in the education setting, and have teachers and staff more in tune to what mental health is, what it looks like, so that we were maybe seeing red flags in students well beyond and getting to a point where significant interventions need to be put into place. And I would love for there to just be some type of programming that exists for young adults to feel connected, to be able to connect with other young adults, to meet. I'm like sitting here developing my next business plan here, but I just feel like there's got to be something else out there that makes you feel more connected and heard and seen and supported than what currently exists right now. And you're right. I feel like we have come a long way as far as like, is there a hotline? Yeah. Is there a mental health crisis center? Yes. So we've definitely come a long way, but I feel like we're still just scratching the surface. Especially with what I see with a lot of youth who are high school aged, especially if they get identified as needing significant needs. The school systems don't move quickly. It takes months to go through the whole meeting process for these students. And meanwhile, they're like drowning, and we're busy picking out what color lifeboat we're going to help get them out of the water with, instead of like actually getting them out of the water. Horrible analogy, but I use it all the time because I feel like that is what's happening. There's a lot of checking the boxes as far as what mental health supports look like, but it's not super deep yet. And that's where I wanted to see it get, is super deep and move quickly and prioritize these children's needs.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes, like you said, I agree. It feels like we are just scratching the surface on quite a lot of this. Like, I don't know, you had a really good answer, so I agree with pretty much most of what you said. But what do you think needs to change in some of those programs? You spoke about the people that you work with having these negative experiences. How can that be approached?
At least in the education setting, there's two things that I feel like are necessary. One is, I think anybody who works with students, regardless if you're a school counselor or a teacher, you need to have some level of mental health training. And I'm not talking about these like foo-foo, workshop things that they give you for a day. Like it needs to be ongoing. It needs to deep dive. It needs to give you some realistic expectations of like, this is what it could look like. The kid with the head down, like, these are the factors to be looking for, kind of thing. And let's approach it with like love and compassion, instead of just thinking, oh, this kid's lazy, or this kid, like those are the type of learning and trainings I want for teachers. But I also want us to completely throw out all the procedures and policies that are currently in place for identifying students and going through the process, because like I shared a few minutes ago, I feel like oftentimes those are the things that are holding up kids from getting what they need, getting hospitalization or residential or any kind of treatment, when we're taking months to like figure out, oh, what's wrong? Oh, we know something's wrong, but let's figure out what that thing is. And then we'll come back for another meeting. Like, let's do something before like this child hurts themselves, or worse, like let's maybe put some priority here, rather than being like, these are the procedures that we need to follow. Like, the procedures, you know what I mean? Like, let's take care of this person and their well-being.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you can't tell, I get very angry and sucked into those things often.
No, I think it's good that you're speaking from a place of passion, because I feel like if anyone's gonna help incite that change, you'd be one of those people. So that's good.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I hope so. I mean, that's the goal. That is definitely the goal. So let me know this. What messages do you wish young adults impacted by mental health would hear, would receive, would know?
I feel like we've covered quite a few of them throughout our little conversation here. One of the biggest ones I would have liked to told myself is that you're not alone in dealing with this. You know, you're allowed to have feelings, and you don't always have to push them down. You don't have to mask your identity or what you're feeling, that kind of thing. And really just telling myself not to blame myself for, not being the greatest student or not being able to make friends at the time, because there was other stuff going on, right?
Yeah. So being compassionate to yourself a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that compassion piece, there's what is it called? Common humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, regardless if you're dealing with a mental illness, poor mental health, or any challenge, really, just realizing that you're human, you're going to make mistakes, and that sort of thing. It's really helpful to me, and I think it's would be a helpful message for a lot of young adults to hear, is that you're bound to make mistakes, you're bound to screw up. We all suffer sometimes, but that's just part of the human experience, right?
Yeah. No, I like that. That's deep. I think my feeling would be not to allow mental health or what you've gone through to define you. It's not who you are. It's an experience. It's something that you are either, I think you will always manage it. I think if you're prone to a certain mental health need, like you're always going to be managing it. And hopefully your management abilities are becoming stronger as you become more attuned with it. But I think sometimes people think, I'm very anxious, so I can't do this, or, or really down on themselves and don't go after things. And so don't let what your mental health status is define you. It's a part of you, but it's not your whole being. It's not what you're solely capable of doing. You're capable of really achieving whatever you want and whatever you set your mind to. And there's nothing about your mental health needs that should stop you or define you from being able to achieve what you ultimately want to. And I wish that was something that I had learned earlier. I think I had always I'd been in my head a lot when I was younger. And, you take those negative messages and they almost write or wire your brain a certain way. And you have to almost rewire your brain to not be as impacted by those.
Yeah, absolutely. When you hear those comments all the time, you start to internalize them, and it's hard not to start saying them yourselves, right?
And you know what? I don't think you even realize it sometimes, especially if that's how you've been conditioned since you were really young. You hear certain messages. And I've learned too, one of the things I've at least learned as an adult, that sometimes even the stuff that my parents said to me is, it did come from a place of love. It wasn't meant to be malicious. And then I've also, and this is a recent realization that I've had too, is sometimes I realized that what my parents were doing, even though it didn't align with me, it was a protection that they were trying to provide to me. because of some trauma of their own, like some inner childhood trauma of their own that maybe no longer aligned with whatever my scenario was, but they were still trying to protect essentially their own inner child by projecting some of these things onto me. And it was really a form of protection is what it was meant to be. But what people don't often realize is what you could perceive or what you are intending to do doesn't necessarily come across to that person if you don't communicate it the right way. And that's what I've realized a lot too, is a lot of, I think some of the traumas or things that upset us were all because the communication breakdown that occurred, and not so much because somebody was trying. Now, sometimes people are trying to be malicious, but sometimes people aren't trying to be malicious. They are trying to love or protect you. They just don't go about it the right way. And it causes damage, especially to young children when they don't realize what's going on at the time. I went on this really random sidebar. I apologize for that.
No, that was a really interesting sidebar, I guess.
It's a recent realization that I came to, and it's like this light bulb hit me. And I'll give you a little bit more context. So I was just talking to my grandparents were more like not very straight-laced individuals. Like they weren't straight-laced. Like I would feel like for their generation, they were like rebels, you know. And I was talking to my dad recently, asking him like, for as like rebels without a cause that your parents were, like, how did you end up so straight-laced? Because I felt like that had held me back a little bit when I was younger, like because, you know, people were worried about how you would be viewed or seen, or there were things like those types of messages that that held me back. And it wasn't until I kind of heard his perspective as, you know, when he was younger, although his parents were kind of living their best life, they were doing things that were not like generationally acceptable, like getting married more than once kind of thing. And I never realized the impact that had on my father, and how, you know, people asking questions or thinking of him negatively because of what his parents were doing would impact him the way that it did. And then that's why he felt like as an adult, he had to be a more straight-laced individual, is because he felt like he was protecting his children from having to experience the same criticisms that he had experienced as a child. And when we started talking about it, like this like light bulb went off in my head. Like I had never thought about it like that before. I just saw it as them being like, why are you keeping me from doing the things that I want to do? And, you know, what would make me happy? It was really stemming from this hurt childhood trauma that was stored up inside them. And, you know, I don't know that it makes your feelings go away, but at least for me, it helps me when I feel like I have a little bit of a better understanding of where their actions were coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no perfect way to parent, I guess.
No, I think we're all just kind of dealing with generational trauma, everybody. And at some point, somebody finally goes, wait a minute, why are we doing it this way? And let's do it a different way. And that's when that finally gets broken. But it takes somebody being like, wait a minute, there's a better way to do this. And I'm hoping that that's happening more frequently now than it ever has in the past.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, you know what, Stephen, we've had a great conversation, and I super love that you were willing to come on and be my first guest. I knew that we would have a great conversation based off conversations we've had before. So before we go, is there anything that you want to share that I didn't get a chance to ask you?
Well, I don't know. I want my final message or final remark just to be that the first step in getting better is always the hardest, and it doesn't have to be a big step. It can be something like getting out of bed today, or brushing your teeth sometime today, eating something. But it's always challenging to take care of your mental health. But if you can approach it from a place out of loving yourself, which can be hard if you're struggling, right? It's easier and it makes a little more sense, but it's hard. And if you're someone who's listening to this that's kind of struggling with that right now, I would like to say that I'm proud of you. And if you're supporting someone who's going through that, I'm also proud of you.
That was beautiful.
Thanks.
That was beautiful. I don't know that I can say it any better than you did. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to say thank you to everyone who listened, and I appreciate it. And if you are dealing with your own mental health journey, just know that you are not alone. There are many of us out there who have kind of walked a mile in your shoes and celebrate you and support you 100% of the way. So thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to speaking with you next time.